Hello, Ariel. Hello. Thanks for the
Hi.
question. And it's not going to be posted probably until the morning, but I will try to stay behind and post our chat tomorrow. I'll just stick around so that it can at least get onto YouTube and then I can move it to it's still maybe Wednesday afternoon because I teach at high school until 1 and on Wednesdays, Mondays and Wednesdays. So I usually can't get it over here to do stuff until then. We'll see. It depends on whether I can get. Problem is, I only have my access to my YouTube channel at home and here on this campus. So I will post it as soon as I possibly can, so that we have what we need. My assumption, though, is most people aren't going to rush to take the test. So it'll probably open Wednesday morning, but it's going to be you have until Sunday to take it. So I would suggest waiting if you can, to at least till Friday or so, but honestly, at least till Thursday morning, because then you'll have you'll have the chats all posted. So the one from today that's earlier that I took, that's going to finish out Dao De Ching, and then the one tonight and the one tomorrow. So I just want to make sure that if you have the chance, of course, that you get to actually go through these chats, and anybody who's not here, because you're here, so you don't have to worry about this recording, but any that you can't come to, you get to watch the recordings for before you take the test. Because I kind of do, I'll even skip chapters and go, well, this is kind of talking about this, but really the big thing is that. And because Tao Te Ching is what it is, a lot of the questions for that particular work are going to be dealing with some of the metaphors and what they might mean. And that's what I talk about in the chat. So hopefully, that lecture will give you enough of an idea of what's going on. All of the plot stuff, the truth is this work has quite a bit of plot. And then Oedipus the King had quite a bit of plot. So there's a lot. I mean, it's a bit, these two chapters of the Aeneid are a bit wordy, but there's stuff that's happening. It's almost like, think about it like an opera. Like it takes 10 minutes to get to certain things because of all this flowery language. But the truth is, the Aeneid is a weird book because it's kind of what it's copying are the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'll just type them into the chat. By Homer, whom we really don't know. We don't know who Homer was. But the Iliad and the Odyssey, kind of like other epics, ancient epics, like, for instance, the Jewish Bible or the Jewish sacred texts, and Gilgamesh, which was written in Sanskrit and is part of ancient India's history. All of these different works were passed down orally for literally centuries. So they weren't written down at all. They would be taught orally from poet to poet, and they'd memorize the entire thing. So the Aeneid is book length. It is huge. So is the Odyssey is a pretty nice sized book. The Iliad is even longer. And yet people would literally commit all of the words to memory and recite these poems for audiences. And sometimes they go chapter by chapter, but each chapter, if I read it out loud, would probably take a couple hours if I, put force into it and did all the sorts of gesturing and did voices and, dramatized it. And so people would listen to these things over many successive nights. And it was just like entertainment. Now they knew the story, kind of like Oedipus. Everybody already kind of knew what was going to happen with Oedipus, unlike us. So they knew the history. This was just a way of kind of commemorating the history. But the Aeneid is odd in that, first of all, it's patterned after the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are Greek texts. But the Iliad was written by the poet Virgil, who is Roman. And this is long after Greece had essentially been annexed into the Roman Empire. So the golden age of Greece was over. Athens and its democracy was over. There were people who still believed in, there were still Greek pagans who worshiped the Greek gods, but the Romans essentially took the gods and changed their names around, except for like Apollo, and adopted those gods for themselves. Now their devotion to the gods was not nearly as pure and spiritual. It was much much less serious. In fact, there's a building in Rome that's called the Pantheon. It still exists today. In fact, it's a Catholic church today. They have Catholic services because Rome and Italy is pretty much Catholic. But the Pantheon is called the Pantheon because it's for all gods. And so the Roman Empire kind of just let whatever places it took into the Roman Empire, it let them be whatever religion they wanted to be. And so it was very much religiously open. The only things it really controlled were the laws so that it could keep order. And so that was one of the big things. But what was interesting is, the Greeks, who of course had been taken over by the Romans, the Greeks had two really well-known and very much revered texts. The Iliad, which covers the war with Troy, where the Greeks go in search of the fair Helen of Troy, who was the most beautiful woman in the world, and they went to go get her. After 10 years of war, they actually did. They not only got her, but they sacked the city. Well, then the Odyssey is all about Odysseus, one of the warriors from Ithaca. He was the king of Ithaca and super smart. Well, he has to get home and he makes some mistakes. And so it ends up taking 10 years for him to get home after a 10-year long war. And then, of course, it has an actual homecoming. He comes home, cleans house, literally, and reunites with his wife and son, who was a baby when he left and is now a grown man because it's been 20 years. And so these two works they said a lot about heroism, what it meant to be a hero, what it meant to have glory, what it meant to die for that, what it meant to live according to one's fate. Now that we talked a lot about with Oedipus, because they're told their fate and they do everything they can to avoid their fate, and of course they run headlong into it. Hello, Mikhail. Yay. Okay, so we've got Mikhail and Ariel in here. So essentially what Virgil does in Rome is he wants to make a Roman epic. And the Romans see themselves as descendants not from Greece, even though they took it over and they think Greek art's awesome and Greek literature is awesome and all that stuff. They see themselves as descendants of Troy, the country that the Greeks fought and destroyed. And so what Virgil does is he kind of takes the patterns that were common in Greek myth and common in those two epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he makes them into a Roman myth and a Roman story about Aeneas, who was a Trojan who escapes the end of the Trojan era and gets away barely with his life. And we're going to see that in chapter 2, in book 2 of this. But he escapes first across the sea and he tries to find his way, wanders around for 7 years, eventually ends up in Carthage, and then will eventually get to Rome and found Rome. Well, he'll move everybody to Rome, and then Romulus and Remus, who are descendants of Mars and a princess of Rome, will really found Rome. Romulus will name it after himself after killing Remus for some reason. But that's a totally different story. It's going to be mentioned in this, though, because essentially what the Romans are trying to do, or what this poet's trying to do, is create this same Roman mystique. Oh, how wonderful Romans are, using the same epic patterns that were used in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Normally in a full semester class, I have people read part of the Iliad and then read this. And so you'll see some of but the truth is there are a lot of parallels, and that we're not necessarily going to cover. Part of his adventures, even the fact that in this beginning, they talk about the fact that he's been wandering for 7 years around in the ocean. Well, that's what Odysseus did. He ended up 7 years just at a single island with Calypso. And he was stuck there where she made love to him all the time and wanted him to marry her, and she didn't want to marry him. So in this case, though, Aeneas is he doesn't really play around with goddesses a whole lot, or nymphs and other stuff, but he does end up having a relationship with Dido, and this is to come. So we're only reading the first two books, though. We're not going to get to where he founds Rome. But it's funny because Odysseus, to get home, actually has to visit the underworld, has to visit Hades and take care of some things, or he can't get home. And he meets Achilles, who had died in battle. He meets a lot of people who had died in battle. He meets Agamemnon, who was killed by his wife when he got home because she and he did not have a very good relationship. And he also sees his mom and dad, that they both passed away while he was gone. I mean, it's really sad. Well, Aeneas actually makes a trip to the underworld as well. So everything that Achilles and Odysseus and everybody do in the other two epics, Aeneas repeats. And that's going to be it's just, I don't know, trying to make their own version of something. So it's kind of it's almost like a Roman fan fiction, where it's a fan fiction of the old Greek epics, only it's the Roman version to make the Romans look good. And so much of this is going to be designed around changing the narrative so the Greeks are the bad guys and the Romans are the good guys. One way of doing that is to take care of the links to who Aeneas is. So Aeneas, even though he's supposed to be a son of Troy, his mom is actually a goddess. Now, when you guys were reading this, did any of you catch on to who he was connected to? Who his mom was? At the beginning, we start talking about a woman who hates him. Okay. And she just wants to make it bad. And this is Juno, or in the Greek, it would be Hera. And she is the goddess of marriage. And she is the wife of Zeus in the Greek, or Jove in the Roman. He's the king of the god, essentially the leader of the gods, the biggest god. He's the one with the lightning bolts and stuff like that. So Juno hates him, but it's because she is worried about a particular place, and that is Carthage. She's worried that she thinks the Trojans are going to ruin Carthage. This is an ancient rumor, so it's like if you were to go and find out what someone's fate was at an oracle. This is one of those gonna happen some days, that the Trojan race would ruin Carthage. Okay. So she doesn't like Trojans, but she also doesn't like Trojans because the whole reason there was a war is because of Helen of Troy. Well, Helen, who was not of Troy, she was actually of Crete, because she married Menelaus. And yet she was stolen by Paris because of Venus, because of Aphrodite in Greek, the goddess of love. Essentially, Juno, so this queen, the wife of Jove, and Venus and Minerva, or Athena in Greek, all wanted to get this golden apple for the fairest. It actually was marked on it for the fairest. And they all wanted to be essentially win the beauty contest and be the fairest person. And they wanted their dad or husband, Jove, to pick who was the fairest person, and he refused. He said, no, go down to the earth and have some mortal do it. Well, the mortal they picked was Paris, this young guy who was a son of Troy. And each one of them, of course, they're all beautiful because they're goddesses, but they all three bribed him. So Juno essentially says, you'll be the greatest king ever if you pick me. Didn't really want to be king. And then Athena, or Minerva, says, well, I'll make you the greatest soldier, the greatest warrior ever. You'll be a general, and your army will be invincible. And he didn't really like that either because he wasn't much of a fighter. And Venus, the goddess of love, said, I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, he picked the most beautiful woman in the world. And Venus led him to Menelaus and to Helen of Troy, well, soon to be of Troy, and he essentially kidnaps her and takes her to Troy, and that's what the whole war was about. The Greeks had to go send 1,000 ships, so hers was the face that launched 1,000 ships. And then they went and spent 10 years trying to get her back. They did, and it's so weird because in the Odyssey, Odysseus, well, actually not Odysseus, his son Telemachus is traveling around and he gets to Crete and he visits Menelaus and Helen, and they're living happily. So even though Menelaus, his wife was with Paris for 10 years, it's like it never happened. It was weirdly very strange. So maybe she's just that pretty. I don't know. But Venus, the goddess of love, is also the mother of Aeneas. And so he is a demigod. He is, he's mortal. He is human and he will die, but he has godly traits, and he certainly has a tie to his mom because she's going to do what she can to help him. But meanwhile, because again, Juno wasn't picked for the beauty contest, she doesn't like the Trojans, and she doesn't like Paris, and she doesn't like Aeneas, and she doesn't like any of these people. And so, and the fact that she has heard that rumor that Carthage would end up being hurt. And it says, yet she had heard an ancient rumor fly, long cited by the people of the sky, so that's the gods, that times to come should see the Trojan race her Carthage ruin and her towers deface. So she loves that city. And gods, and this was Roman as well as Greek and many other polytheistic systems, gods tended to be patrons of different cities. So Athens is even named after Athena, and the Acropolis where the Parthenon is, it had a huge statue inside of it that was Athena, and people would go and leave stuff for, gifts and stuff like and sacrifices whatever for Athena and pray to her. She was that city's patron goddess. And so Carthage's patron goddess though is Venus. I mean, it's Juno. And so Juno doesn't want anything to happen to Carthage. Unfortunately, one cannot change fate, even in the Roman mythology. And so despite the fact that she's trying to stop the Trojans, and that's why they're wandering around for 7 years, because she keeps getting in their way. So she's essentially saying she's looking at the fact that they're getting close to Carthage, and that bothers her. And so she is afraid of what's going to happen to Carthage. And she's upset because even though Greece won against the Trojan state, the Trojans aren't all dead. And she would wish that they were. If the Trojans had all been killed, then yay, she wouldn't have to worry about Carthage because there are no Trojans. But some Trojans survived, escaped on the ships, and are wandering. And at the same time, there's another fate that's foretold, and that's to Aeneas, the main character of this thing, that Aeneas will found Rome. That's his destiny. And so that's why he's traveling. He's going to another place, and it's his destined place to be. It's where he's supposed to end up. And so she's still, but it says, she's upset that the Trojans still live, and she's also mad and envious because she didn't get picked by Paris, because of the doom. In her heart, the doom remained of partial Paris, because he was biased and he picked Venus. Now, if anyone asks you back then, who's the most beautiful goddess, it was probably Venus. She's the goddess of love, after all. It's not Athena. She's the goddess of war and wisdom. But they would say, well, of course the goddess of love is most beautiful. And yet Hera's still mad. Juno is still angry that she wasn't picked and that's probably the number one reason she doesn't like the Trojans, is because they didn't pick her. Paris didn't give her the apple and say she was the fairest. So she was upset because she's a vain person. Well, a vain goddess. And goddesses, I guess, were typically vain. So she essentially has been trying for a while to drive them away. In 7 long years, the unhappy wandering train were tossed by storms, scattered through the main, and And so for 7 years already, she's tormented them. And yet they're still going. And the Queen of Heaven, that is Juno, did thus her fury vent. She's like, they're still gonna get there. Like, everything I tried and I'm still gonna lose. And must the Trojans reign in Italy? So fate will have it, and Jove as his force. That's her husband, remember, and he likes the Trojans. He didn't care who picked Helen. He just didn't care. But he was a fan of the Trojans, and he did what he could to help them out for as long as he could, until fate essentially told him, you can't help anymore because they have to fall. It's their fate for that city of Troy to fall. But now she's like, I don't have the power to stop them. And she says, why is it that, and this is Pallas Athena, why is she allowed to be angry and burn a navy and drown men, but I don't get to? That's not fair. And she says, she went and did that. She beat up all kinds of people, but no, I'm not allowed to. But I, who walk in awful state above the majesty of heaven, the sister wife of Jove, because she's his sister and his wife. Long story. But she says, look, I've been trying for 7 years to fix this and wreck them all, and it's still not happening. And so what she does, she actually goes to Aeolus, and you can see this here. She travels to his cave, and it's a cave of winds, because Aeolus, and that's actually his name in the Greeks as well, is the god of the winds. And the reason he is because somebody has to keep them at bay. Somebody has to like rein them in and bag them up and keep them locked, because otherwise the winds would rage all over and they'd just destroy everything. And so Jove essentially assigned him that job. You're supposed to take care of these winds so they don't blast everybody to pieces. And I guess he lets them out sometimes when we have tornadoes or hurricanes or tsunamis or something like that. But it was one way of explaining why winds can be calm one day and then really blasty the next, But she goes to Aeolus and says, please, you got to help me. You just got to help me against these people. And they explain actually why the father of the gods, that's Jove, essentially confined the winds up and then gave the job to Aeolus to guard them. But she comes in, she's like, oh, Aeolus, for to thee, the king of heaven, the power of tempests and of winds has given. And essentially she's saying, look, you're the one with this power. Can you please help me? There's this whole group of Trojans steering on their way to Italy, and I need you to stop them. Raise all your winds, with night involve the skies, sink or disperse my fatal enemies. And she essentially says, the charming daughters of the main around my person wait and bear my train. So essentially, I'm going to give you one of my maidens, Diopia, this chicklet right here, one of the nymphs, and make the father of a happy line. So I'll give you a chick and to marry and have lots of kids with if you will do this for me. And he says, sure, I will absolutely do as you wish. They're under your command. He essentially gives her, well, you're my sovereign, yours is my sovereign's grace. And as your guest, I sit with gods at the celestial feast. So you tell me what I'm supposed to do. And so he does. He starts tossing the winds over, and immediately, and of course, this is to explain weird freak storms and stuff like that. But immediately everything starts coming in. So south, east, and west with mixed confusion roar and roll the foamy billows to the shore. So it's not just that the winds are blowing, but these guys are at sea still. And so that tosses all the waves too, and makes for a very scary trip. Is that working for you guys so far? Do you understand what I'm talking about? Am I going too fast, or is this okay?
No, this is okay.
It's okay? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Just anytime I start saying something, if you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, please put that in the chat and say,
Okay.
I don't understand what you're talking about. Could you please explain? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I just don't want you to be confused still. That's the whole point of these. Okay, so, and I can get a little you know, into this because I just love all this kind of stuff. It's just weird and epic. And so imagine this epic movie with all this churning water and everything. And so essentially, they're in trouble. They know they're going to die if something doesn't stop. And the Trojan chief, and that is Aeneas, with lifted hands and eyes invokes relief. So he prays to the gods out in the middle of this tempest. He goes, thrice and four times happy those that under Ilian walls before their parents died. Okay, so he's just saying the people who died in Troy, that's Ilion. So we have the Iliad because Troy, let me put this in here, equals Ilium. Oh, Ilium, I could just spell. And so Ilion, that just means the Trojan walls, that under Trojan walls before their parents died. So he says people who died back in Troy have got to be much happier than we are. Because all I've done is suffer for 7 years now in these horrible storms, wandering from place to place, lost, not having a clue where to go next. And so he even says, why could I not by that strong arm be slain and lie by noble Hector on the plain? Hector was the oldest and the best of the sons of Hector, of Priam, the king of Troy. And he actually figures really strongly in the Iliad, and he's a good dude. He really is. He's a really good dude. But he's a Trojan, and so of course that was a Greek epic. So he ended up dying. He actually died. He killed Patroclus, Achilles' best friend, and Achilles in a rage. Achilles wasn't actually fighting. He was angry at some of the other Greeks, but he jumped back into the battle, and then he killed Hector in revenge. But he's essentially saying, why couldn't I have been slain right next to Hector and died like he did, or Sarpedon? And he starts naming a bunch of Trojans who died in the war. Why couldn't I have just been stabbed back there and not have to go through all this crap? Essentially, is what he's saying. And meanwhile, of course, the storm's still going. And fierce Boreas, you know that, like the lights, the northern lights, that's where that word is connected to. But they literally, the winds drove against his flying sails and rent the sheets. So they rip up the sails of his ship. The ships are literally being torn to pieces. The galley gives her side, so it starts to list to the side and turns her prow, while those astern, descending down the steep through gaping waves, behold the boiling deep. So other boats are literally like heading, they're leaning down, and the people on board can look down into the bottom of the ocean. And of course, this is the Mediterranean, but they're all, I mean, it's bad. This is a terrible storm, and their ships, they don't think anything's they're all just gonna die. And they're all going to be dashed on the shallows of the moving sand, and in mid-ocean left them moored aland. So they're all in trouble. The ships are going to sink. They're all going to drown. Everything's going to be torn apart. The trembling pilot from his rudder torn was headlong hurled. Thrice round the ship was tossed, then bulged at once, and in the deep was lost. And here and there above the waves were seen arms, pictures, precious goods, and floating men. And so it's bad. It's super bad. Okay. All these different, and they name more of the people who survived the Trojan War who were on the boat with Aeneas. And these, of course, are the people who are going to help him found Rome. And so Neptune, who is, I guess the Greek version is, why can I not remember the Greek version? What's wrong with me? But Neptune is the god of the sea. And we know the Roman names better. A lot of people do, because we have planets named after them. Obviously Neptune is one of those. But Poseidon, that's his name. Why in the world did I? But in the Greek, it would be Poseidon. But god of the sea. If you watch the Percy Jackson thing, that Poseidon is the dad of Percy Jackson. So that's why he has some affinity with water and things like that. But Neptune is down under the ocean. He's down in the water in the Mediterranean. He hears all this mess, and he's like, what the heck is going on upstairs? And he's angry. So he comes up and he says, who's playing around with my ocean? And stop it. I'm the one in charge of the ocean. I'm the one who deals with winds on the ocean. And he knows it's his sister who did it. He knows it's Juno. And he knows why. But he was actually a supporter of the Trojans too. And so he calms everything down. He tells the winds to go home because I'm in charge, and I say, get out. So he says, hence to your Lord, my royal mandate. He's talking to the winds themselves, saying, go back to Aeolus and tell him this is not for him to be doing. It's my job. And I'm not going to let that happen. And so while he spoke, he smoothed the sea, dispelled the darkness, and restored the day. So essentially, he saved Aeneas and all of his men. And he even finds different places. So he finds the vessels, and he opes the deep and spreads the moving sands and heaves them off the shoals. And so essentially, Aeneas and all his men don't die because Poseidon spares them. And he's pretty angry at his sister too. So when the father of the flood appears and o'er the seas his sovereign trident rears, their fury falls. So everything calms down. And the Trojans start rowing because they're like, okay, we have this calm, let's go. What's funny though, and it's kind of like with Oedipus the king, because she dredges up the storm when she does, the closest place to go with their tattered ships and, barely making it, is to row to Carthage, the very place she said she didn't want them to go. And so by trying to stop fate, she pushes them to fate. So they have no choice. They can't land somewhere else. The closest place is Libya, and right there in Libya is Carthage, right on the coast. And so they don't have a choice. They have to survive. They have to actually get to Libya. Okay, so they do that. They actually get there, and they don't all die. Aeneas climbs the mountain's airy brow, so they finally get there and takes a prospect of the seas below. And he didn't die. No vessels were in view, so he doesn't see the ships, but on the plain, 3 beamy stags command a lordly train of branching heads. So he sees not ships, but stags. So big deer with, lots of points to their antlers. And he stood, and while secure they fed below, he took the quiver and the trusty bow. So he actually uses his bow and arrow, and he kills the 3 first, those 3 big stags with all the antlers. And then he kills other ones until there are 7 dead totally. Okay. And what he does is essentially he had 7 ships. Now think about the repeat of the number. So 7 ships he was on, him and all of his people. They've already been journeying for 7 years, and he just killed 7 deer, 3 stags, and then probably some girls. And those will actually be, each one will be given to a ship, so to feed their people. Because remember, they're like, and he even gives out wine, jars of generous wine, and he sets them in. So he gives wine and equal portions of the venison to everybody. And he says, okay, we're going to be okay. Endure and conquer. That's what he tells them. So he's, remember, he's like the king of all these people. He's the leader. And Jove will soon dispose to future good our past and present woes. So it's been rough, but it's going to get better. And then he starts talking about where they've been. And it's funny because everywhere he says he's been are places. These are places Odysseus went in the Odyssey. So he passed through a place where he had to face either Scylla on one side or Charybdis on the other side. And I'll just put in Charybdis. And Charybdis was like a whirlpool that would pull down a whole boat. Scylla had so many heads, and she would just, I think it was 6, and she'd pluck off 6 soldiers off the boat, but she wouldn't destroy the whole boat. So Odysseus traveled on the Scylla side, but he didn't tell his crew, hey, by the way, 6 of y'all are going to die. He just took his chances. But at least the whole ship wasn't gone. And so this is what Aeneas had to do. He went through and did exactly the same thing. He traveled through, faced Scylla, and then the inhuman Cyclops and his den defied. That's exactly what Odysseus did first, well over 1,000 years before this thing's written. So this is total copying. This is fan fiction right here. So he's like, oh, I already got through these horrible hazards, but you know, what else am I going to have to face, really? And the truth is most of his hardship is over. The worst thing that's going to happen to him is that he's going to fall in love with a woman and then have to leave. And it's going to be far worse for Carthage than it is for him. So anyway, he keeps on, you know, so he's telling them all these wonderful things. We're going to be okay. Live and reserve yourselves for better fate. So it's going to be happier tomorrow. These words he spoke, but spoke not from his heart. His outward smiles concealed his inward smart. And so he doesn't tell them how he really feels. He just puts on a nice front, and so that they'll all feel okay and eat. And so they describe all of that. They go to eat and they're doing all sorts of stuff. But Aeneid, above the rest, Aeneas mourns the fate of brave Orontes and the uncertain state of Gaius, Lycus, and Amycus. So essentially, he's worried about the people who he can't find, the people that were lost at sea. Okay. And Jove is watching him, and he knows something's up. And then Venus is sitting right. I know Venus is Jove's daughter. The goddess of love is the daughter of the king of the gods. And remember, she is Aeneas's mom, and that makes Jove his grandpa, if you think about it that way. And so she's kind of like weepy, which Venus can do really good. She with a lowly look, not free from tears, she speaks to him. Okay. And she says, look, you're really powerful, O king of gods and men, you know, because I always talk to my dad like this. It's just what I do, because we talk in epic poems. But no, that's not what, but that's how they all talk in this. I mean, it's all kind of very high-handed language. But she says, how could my pious son thy power incense? In other words, what do you have against my son? What happened? She goes, our hope of Italy is not only lost on various seas by various tempests tossed, but shut from every shore and barred from every coast. So she says he's supposed to be founding Rome, and instead he can't land anywhere. How in the world is he going to get to where he needs to go and found Italy if you don't do something? Do you hate him? Is that why you're not letting him, you know, is that why he's been wandering around for 6-7 years, stuff like that? But she's kind of guilt tripping her dad into all of this. She says, look, we were told that, you know, we're descended from your sacred line. We are told that this is what's going to happen. He's going to go and found Rome and have that throne. But when's that going to happen? And the father is all sweet. He just loves his little daughter. And he says, he first gave her a holy kiss, and he says, don't worry, it's going to happen. The fates of thine are fixed and stand entire. He is going to get to Rome. And when he dies, he is going to come up to heaven and be with us, because he is your son and he's my grandson, which never, I mean, most mortals never get there. So Aeneas will be special, because most mortals, even if they're part god or whatever, they don't end up, they just die and go to Hades like everybody else. But he says, don't worry, He says, it's not long from now that he's gonna get to go and found Rome. So he goes, I've searched the mystic rolls of fate. Your son, and it's not in not too long a time, in Italy shall wage successful war, shall tame fierce nations, and build cities, and until every foe subdued, the sun thrice through the signs his annual race shall run. This is his time prefixed. So thrice through the signs his annual, so within 3 years. So again, he's got a 10-year journey, just like Odysseus had a 10-year journey and the Trojan War had a 10-year run. He's done 7 of the years already. Now he's got 3 more years, and then he's going to get where he's supposed to be. Okay. And he's going to rule. He says, and after he dies, Asianus is the next person. He's going to then be called Iulus, which is a weird name, but he's going to start reigning. He's going to reign for 30 years, and he starts going to, this king, then that king. And finally, we get to Ilia the fair, a priestess and a queen who, full of Mars in time, with kindly throes, shall at a birth two goodly boys disclose, Romulus and Remus. And Romulus will actually be the one who names Rome after himself. Okay, so he says, this is all destined. It's going to happen. Don't worry about it. Okay. So this is, I know you're freaking out now because it's been 7 years and it wasn't going to happen, but it's okay. It's going to all happen. He goes through the whole line of people. Now they love this stuff. It's kind of like if you ever read the biblical begats, then he begat him and he begat him and that's kind of what all this stuff is. So he's helping. He's essentially saying, don't worry, it's going to be fine. And then he sends a messenger down to Carthage to make sure that the Carthaginian queen, Dido, will let these Trojans in, that she won't turn them away from her shores. Okay. And so it essentially, I mean, it says Selenius, but it's probably the messenger god more than anything else. And he's taking the message down to her, hey, do what you're supposed to do. Okay. So it says, it even says, he goes, as fate's required, they have to give the peace, and they have to essentially they have to let these Trojans live at peace and not chase them away. The queen herself suspends the rigid laws, that's Dido, and the Trojan pities and protects their cause. Okay, so while they're communicating with the queen, Dido, Aeneas isn't sleeping. So everybody else is gone and they're snoring. And he is still awake because he's worried. So all night long, he doesn't sleep. And when the sun restored the cheerful day, he rose. And he wants to go and figure out where they are, find whatever he can. And because he's just never been here before. This is all new stuff. Everywhere he's been is new stuff for him, because he lived in Troy his whole life. So armed with 2 pointed darts, he leaves his friends and then goes off into the woods. And in the wood, he meets his mom, Venus. Okay. Now Venus is disguised though, and this is actually this is mimicking Odysseus and the Odyssey, because Athena was Odysseus's like bestie friend. She just thought Odysseus was cool, probably because he was pretty smart. And so she'd guide him through several parts of his journey, but she always disguised herself. Sometimes she'd be a little boy, sometimes she'd be a little girl, sometimes she'd be an old man, or just some maiden. But each time, despite the disguise, he always recognized her because he was super smart. And I think he just figured out who Athena was. I think he had her number. He figured out what she liked and who she was and what she cared about. And they had a mutual adoration society. But she was a virgin goddess. So of course other than that, they're not doing anything else. Okay. But this is of course Aeneas's mom, but she comes down in disguise. In fact, she comes down as a huntress in her habit and her mien, her dress a maid, her air, although she, kind of stands and moves like a queen. Okay. And even, her knees were bare, her garments were bound in knots, her hair was loose, and she has a bow and arrow, and she seemed a virgin. of the Spartan blood. So a Spartan, like like a warrior huntress or something. And she comes in and she goes, have you seen somebody who looks just like me? I'm looking for her, but she wears like a lynx's hide, and at full cry she was pursuing a tusky boar. And the son says, no, I'm sorry, I haven't seen anybody. And he even calls her O Virgin, which is really funny because he assumes she's like Diana, the goddess of the hunt, that she's a virginal queen, kind of like Athena, but she's not. The goddess of love is not a virgin, and she hasn't ever been a virgin. She has a husband, and that's Vulcan or Hephaestus, but Vulcan is the goddess of the, essentially of, um, he's a blacksmith, and he's the son of Hera and well, no, Juno and Jove, the mom and dad over everybody. But she doesn't love him. She's had tons of affairs with other people. So, but anyway, he says, no, I'm sorry, I haven't seen anybody at all. And she goes, well, that's really weird. And she goes, but he says, are you a goddess? And can you tell me kind of where we are? And she says, well, I'm not a goddess. Okay. I wouldn't claim to that. Of course she is, she's lying. But she goes, you're in Libya. And the people here are they're not really peaceful, and they tend to be really rough when they're warring. But Carthage is like right over there. Okay. And she even tells him Phoenician Dido rules the growing state. So the queen of this place is Dido. And she's had a really weird checkered past, because Dido actually was in love with a man, and he was killed because another man essentially killed him in secret and then married her, only for her to find out later on that the second man she married had murdered the first. And it was horrifying. And so she kind of like doesn't like men. And that's probably one of the reasons she's a bit off, bit weird with, as a ruler of Carthage, and they're not super welcoming, is because bad stuff happened to her. Okay. And she doesn't realize what happened until like there was the ghost of her former lover comes and says, by the way, I was killed, and the guy you're with did it, and he murdered me. And so it wasn't until then that she realized what was going on. And so now everything is, she fled from that creepo, and then she established Carthage. Okay. And so that's how she got where she was, and that's why she's queen of Carthage. But then she says, but where are you from? That's what Venus asks him, even though she knows the answers. And he tells her, he goes, oh, well, it's a tedious story, but we're Trojan. And there were all sorts of storms, and so we ended up here. And my name is Aeneas. So he doesn't lie to her about anything. And but I need to go to Italy. I'm trying to go and found Rome. This is my job. And so for 7 years, we've been traveling, and now we're down to 7 ships, and that's all that we have. And they're within the harbor here, but I'm in trouble. This is not good. And she says, don't worry about your woes. You're not unbeloved by heaven. You're going to be okay. And she actually tells him, go ahead and go talk to Dido. Everything's going to be okay. Just go to Dido, go and see Carthage, and you're going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. And she says, go, just do what I say and pursue the path before you and the town. So go into Carthage. Okay. And then she turns, and I guess she didn't disguise the back part of herself. And so all of the hair that looked disheveled in the front, the huntress part, all that, the fake who she was on the front, once she turns around, is all gone. And so he sees her hair drags all the way to the ground, and he sees who she is, that it's Venus. And he's actually kind of irritated. He's like, well, why did you not tell me who you were? And why did you leave me only after, why do I know who you are only because you're leaving now after you've done all this? So he, unlike Odysseus, he was just like, ha ha, Athena's playing a joke on me, but I still see who she is. He's angry. He's upset because even though his mom loves him, she's not exactly the best mom ever. So, but that's, he's got to be tough. So essentially what happens is they start going. Okay, he's going to do what she says. So despite the fact that he's angry with her, he obeys her. And that's the key to almost all of these epics is it doesn't matter whether you love the gods or not, you have to do what they say. Okay, so he goes and walks into Carthage and it's beautiful. But he is kept concealed. Like he doesn't realize there are clouds like all around him, making him look like just one of everybody else. Because if the clouds weren't there, he would stand out because he's that pretty and demigod like or whatever. And so he passes along through Carthage unseen. And there in the center of the town is actually where he's going to see Dido. Sidonian Dido here with solemn state had built Juno's temple. So again, remember Juno loves Carthage, loves Dido, loves all of this stuff. And the goddess accepted the shrine and made the place divine. And so Aeneas is blown away by it. He thinks it's beautiful. And so it revives his courage and gets rid of his fear. And so he looks up and he's looking for a queen. But instead he sees a whole depiction of the Trojan War. And it's funny because when Odysseus is captured, he's actually found on the beach in this, I think it was in Thrace. That's where he ended up. But the poet started singing while they're eating dinner, and they were singing about the Trojan War and all the Greeks who died. And Odysseus starts crying and crying and crying and crying. And everybody's like, why are you crying? Oh, well, let me tell you. And then he recounts his story, how he was in the Greek war and he was one of the warriors, and how many people died. Well, so now instead of that poem, we have this whole description of this, essentially a relief sculpture, where all of the battles of Troy are shown and all these Trojans dying. And so he's recognizing everybody. He recognizes, oh my gosh, there's the king. He recognizes Achilles on the enemy side and Agamemnon on the enemy side. And then he sees all these people being killed. And so the trembling Trojans quit the field. They're all running away from Achilles. He sees Diomedes, and he was a warrior, a pretty vicious warrior of the Greek side. But he just keeps watching all these people, and you don't have to remember all their names because that's just too much to handle. But he's looking at this relief sculpture, and it's just making him just cry. And even gets to the end of the Iliad where Achilles slew Hector, and then Priam goes to Achilles and begs for Hector's body back and buys it. And so he just cries and cries. So sad an object and so well expressed, drew sighs and groans from the grieved hero's breast. So here's Aeneas doing the same thing Odysseus did, crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And he can't stop because here's more and more. Okay. And so it's just absolutely beautiful. But it's horrible and it's sad, and it's like watching, the old movies of something bad that you've gone through. And so thus, while the Trojan prince employs his eyes, he's watching, he's analyzing and examining all of these relief sculptures. The beauteous Dido, with a numerous train and pomp of guards, ascends the sacred fane. And so she's walking out of the temple as he's looking at the side. Okay. So this is going to be their big meeting. And Diana, let's see, where is it? And so she's beautiful. And even says the graceful, when in the dance, the graceful goddess leads the choir of nymphs and overtops their heads, known by her quiver. She walks majestic. She looks their queen. So she's really pretty anyway. And so she's walking through, everybody's like, oh, here's the queen, and they all kind of worship her too. But of course the whole point is that she is going to have to meet Aeneas. Okay, so then it has to be spectacular, and this is kind of where we're getting towards the end of this chapter. And so the prince, unseen, kind of sees what's going on, and actually he sees his friends, because several of the ones he was worried about have survived the storms, and they're there entreating Dido for help. And he's still unseen, so he's watching from a distance, but he sees them, and he's like, and he wants to go and join them, but he's a little worried about his reception. And so he's still, remember, he's still all clouded over and nobody can see him. And so, and they want it, they're just asking, can we please stay in Carthage? Okay. And so one of them is begging, and he actually does all that. Please, help the wretched Trojans tossed on every shore, that kind of stuff. And he makes this speech of plea, calls on gods, asks for her mercy, talks about what they've been through, the shipwreck, what men, what monsters, what inhuman race, what laws, what barbarous customs of the place shut up a desert shore to drowning men and drive us. So he's like, don't be cruel. Don't be, we were shut out by so many other places. Please be compassionate to us. And then they start talking about Aeneas. Aeneas was our prince. He was awesome. A juster lord or nobler warrior, never drew a sword. He's just such a wonderful dude. And we're not looking for anything because we got to go and stuff, but please, if our prince be safe, we're going to go on to Italy anyway. So it's not like we're going to, take your jobs or eat your food or stuff like that. We just need respite, essentially. Once we get Aeneas, we'll be gone again. Okay. And so the queen listens to him, and then she says, don't worry. Normally I guard my coast because of all the stuff that's gone on, but I was asked not to. And so I'm not stupid, and I'll totally help you guys out, essentially. Your men shall be received, your fleet repaired. And if you want to stay, we'll help you with a convoy of ships to help you on your way, or you can stay and be warriors for us and defend our city. So you don't have to leave. She makes it very clear from the beginning, you don't have to leave. And she goes, my wealth, my city, and myself are yours. And would to heaven the storm you felt would bring on Carthaginian coasts your wandering king. She wants to see Aeneas too. Okay, and we'll go look for him. Okay, we're going to go and make a search. And essentially, wow, this, everybody's happy. So Achates sees her and says, that's really great, and then Achates talks to Aeneas and says, we need to do something. Okay, so here is what, as soon as Achates says, wow, this is just like what your mother said, the cloud that's around Aeneas gives way. Okay, poof. And suddenly, here's Aeneas in all of his beautiful glory, pretty as a picture, serenely august in visage and serenely bright. His mother goddess with her hands divine had formed his curling locks and made his temple shine. So not only is he already good looking, but she makes him look even prettier. She does her little like goddess finesse. And so he looks magnificent. And he comes up to Dido and says, he whom you seek am I. And she, he says, presenting gracious queen before your throne, a prince that owes his life to you alone. And he starts speaking these glorious words, looking so glorious and handsome. And all this other stuff is going, and he keeps talking, and he ends talking, and he looks at her and looks at his friend, and he's like, yay, and joyful his expecting friends embrace. So he's like, here's my speech. Thank you so much, goddess. You're such a beautiful queen, blah, blah, blah. And he's, of course, she's looking at him going, man, that is a hot dude. And then he hugs his friends, but meanwhile, she is looking at him. And she is she can't take her eyes away from him. She's pleased with his motions, ravished with his grace, admired his fortunes, more admired the man. And then she's like, wait a second. And she says, wait a second, who left you here? Who did this? Who dumped you here and ruined your ships and stuff like that? And so she says, essentially, she wants him, she goes, I'm not going to be able to spend lots of money on you, but I'll be kind to you. And she says, I'm sorry that you've lost all this stuff and you've had to endure all these things, but I'm going to absolutely help you. But the truth is because of the way he comes in, because of that surprise, because of the way he speaks, because of how pretty he's been made and everything like that, she's in love with him. And that's the key. She'll give him anything that he wants, even if he's not asking a whole lot, because he really isn't. But then this is the kicker. We have winged love, okay? Cupid, Eros in the Greek. And he is Venus's son, and she actually goes, and so essentially she goes to her son and says, you need to go down and shoot someone. You know what Juno's done to people, but now and right now, you know, you've for a while you've suffered with me because Aeneas has been wandering, but now Dido is detaining him, and I'm a little worried. And so what I need you to do is put inside of Dido, I need you to shoot an arrow with a love so violent, so strong, so sure, that as neither age can change nor art can cure. So I want you to make her hopelessly and unchangeably and utterly forever in love with Aeneas. And that's what he does. And because of this, she is going to love him so desperately. It's really awful. I mean, it's manipulative. It destroys Dido. Because remember, he has to go where? He's not going to stay in Carthage. He has to leave. And yet she falls in love with him utterly. And he becomes the sole center of everything. She actually will spend a while trying to help to get him to stay. And he says, no, but it's my destiny. I can't, again, you can't undo your fate. And so he'll say, no, I got to go. And unfortunately, I'll tell you what happens next time because we're out of time and we already went 5 minutes over. Sorry, Ariel. Thank you for sticking around. But in the next chapter, now that they've fallen in love, they're going to actually have a feast, and he's going to tell his side of the story. That's chapter 2 of what happened at Troy on that last fateful night when the Greeks got inside and started slaughtering Trojans and to end the war. Okay. Any questions, Ariel? Anything not make sense? Okay, I'm glad it made more sense. Well, it's hard because the language is just so flowery and stuff. And that's the nature of it is, but still it can be, just know that everything you'll read 10 or 15 lines and you can write it out in a sentence, literally, because sometimes it's hard to understand exactly what's going on. But so Venus essentially is just dooming Dido to fall in love with Aeneas. But Aeneas is not at fault here. He's just trying to get where he needs to be. And she doesn't give him the arrow so that because if he fell desperately in love with Dido, he would never leave. And so that's the problem, is he has to go found Rome. So I'm glad that helps some. I'm sorry if it seemed like I was rattling around, but I do sometimes. Hopefully tomorrow will be the second chapter it was a faster read. It should have been a faster read, and it's more of him telling his story of Troy. So that might be more interesting anyway. But I will see you if you can't be here, I'm going to record it. And if nobody shows up, I'll still record it and make sure that we get through that second book so I can post them both. Okay. Have a good evening. And thank you for coming, Ariel.